All right, the YouTube is live. YouTube is live. Broadcast is live. Oh, I forgot to mention, there's going to be a little bit of a delay.
Mm-hmm.
It might screw you up if you're not paying attention to yourself speaking.
Mm-hmm.
If it helps, you can remove a headphone if you need to, because it can be a little distracting if you're not used to it.
Okay.
If you speak right now, say hi, my name is Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris.
So you can get, it's a little distracting.
I think I'm a little used to it because when I do telemedicine, there's a little delay too.
Okay. So, perfect. We are live on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. And we will be starting the recording in 3, 2, 1, go. Bumper music on the way. Welcome to the Sober Happy Hour radio broadcast. I am your host. We are coming to you live on youtube.com, streaming all around the world via podcast on iTunes, facebook.com/soberhappyhour, @soberhappyhour on Twitter. And if you'd like, you may send us an email, soberhappyhour@gmail.com. It is June the 18th of 2016. I'm here with my good friend Chaz. Say hello, Chaz.
Hello, Chaz.
Oh, there we go. Everybody's wondering, where the hell is Robinson? Well, I promise you this, Robinson will return. Apparently, he forgot that it was Saturday night again, and was in his car and trying to do the show from there, and we told him it sounded terrible and that he needed to go home. So he just joined the call. Robinson, say hello, Robinson. Oh, do it, man. Fuck you. All right. Dead air is never a good thing. Robinson, I know you're there. I can see your ugly face. We'll give him a minute. Well, I just got back from a lovely vacation in Sedona, as a matter of fact. Sedona, Arizona. And every year my family goes to Sedona. I probably spoke about it last year for a quick minute. And we just got back today. And we were afraid that we were going to have a litter of kittens waiting for us when we got home. That did not happen, which is a good thing, because we like to be there when the kittens are born, just in case anything goes wrong. Robinson, I muted you if you can hear us. I don't think you can hear us yet. All right, you're muted. Don't forget to unmute yourself. Wonderful. But we got back. No kittens. Everything's still in order. Always a success. And I considered not having a show tonight and extending my vacation all the way until Monday and not doing a show. But I said, you know what? These fine people that rely on us for all of their sober, happy hours, they needed a show. So we're doing a show anyway. And the bigger reason why we decided to do a show tonight was because we have a very special guest. That very special guest is sitting next to me, but for the sake of anonymity, we are keeping her identity a secret. So Robinson, are you almost ready? Give me a thumbs up if you're almost ready. He says 2 fingers up, which maybe that means he's ready. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know exactly what that means. I got something for you, Robinson. 1 finger up. But I will introduce our guest for the sake of this not being an absolutely terrible radio show. Our guest this evening is all the way from another part of the country, here live in the studio, hiding behind me, Dr. Chris. Dr. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
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 Thank you for being here. We appreciate you coming all the way here from thousands of miles away just to be on this radio show. It has nothing to do with you already being in Arizona on vacation with me and my family. It has nothing to do with that at all. You are here because of this show.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Chaz, my
Yes.
audio keeps like changing. 1 second it'll sound good, and the next second it'll sound lower. Do you hear that, or is that just my shitty headphone setup?
I think I hear it a little
You
bit.
think you hear it. You are
Yeah.
so worthless sometimes. It is
Yes,
amazing.
I know.
I know. You have broken headphones. I just want to make sure it's not going to sound this way on the show, because that would make me absolutely insane. There's no reason that it should. Everything seems somewhat normal. But, Dr. Chris, tell us why you are here today and who you are and what you do, as much as you can say. I know that you can't tell us everything, and we're totally okay with that because we're used to being lied to. Who are you?
Well, first and foremost, I am Mike McKenzie's aunt.
You're giving too much away.
That's okay. And I've been wanting to be a special guest on this show for a long time, so I'm really glad to be here. It's an honor.
No.
Yes, it is.
Get out.
Yeah, no. I'm so proud of what you guys are doing. So I am a psychiatrist, and I work in corrections. And so I've been doing that for I've been a psychiatrist for like 20 years, but I've worked in corrections for the last 4. And that's given me a very interesting perspective on addictions since, well, I couldn't say for certain, but a vast, vast majority of people in prisons and in jails have severe addiction problems. And unfortunately, in the wonderful United States of America, we tend to criminalize addiction rather than view it as a medical problem and a social problem and addressing it as such. So,
Not to cut you off, but we were talking earlier, and you said that, I mean, nearly 90%, and maybe even more than that, of the people that you work with have some substance abuse issues. Was that what we were talking about?
I think when I was saying 90% or more, I was talking about the female offenders in the women's prison have
That's right.
severe trauma
PTSD.
related to childhood trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault, that type of thing. And that goes hand in hand with substance abuse in that population because, dealing with those kinds of emotions is so difficult.
And we know from doing this show for as long as we have that the trauma and having misery and discomfort and a lack of stability in your life can very easily lead to substance use and then substance abuse. So would you say that dealing with substance abusers or addicts is something that you see often in corrections? Is that what we would refer to it as lay people in the corrections industry, as opposed to calling them prisoners or something dramatic?
Yeah, we don't call them prisoners. We refer to that population as offenders.
Offenders.
I refer to them as patients because to me they're my patients. And and I work more with the women than the men, although I work with men too, and that population is way more traumatized than you would think.
The male population.
Oh yeah, I mean, childhood abuse, and then later, well, it kind of plays out differently in men and women, but childhood abuse, including physical abuse and sexual abuse, emotional abuse, isn't uncommon in men. We kind of tend to think of it as affecting women more, but it affects men quite a bit too, and that kind of becomes sort of a common thread in substance use. So I would say it's rare that I'm dealing with a patient that does not have co-occurring substance use disorder.
in addition to the trauma and what we talked about, which was essentially post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, particularly in the female population. I think the rates of PTSD are extremely high, and in fact, they kind of approach treatment with a unique approach that's called trauma-informed treatment, meaning that we approach all of their treatment realizing that almost everybody has a background of trauma.
So I think I actually really like that you work more with the female side of it, because when we, as the idiot population, think of PTSD, we immediately go towards military. And not that there aren't females in our military. There obviously are quite a few, but we associate PTSD with men in combat. And they come home from their tour in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they saw such crazy shit that they have this post-traumatic stress disorder. But what we were talking about earlier was actually really interesting to me, because post-traumatic stress has nothing to do with combat. I mean, it can, but post-traumatic stress is its own thing that is not specifically military or combat related. And so these people that you're talking about having early childhood trauma or PTSD, typically, what are some of the things that these people are dealing with? What happened to them?
Oh, some of the most horrible things you can think of. I mean, this is an extremely skewed population, and it kind of breaks your heart when you think about it, because the people I see, particularly the women, but the men too, have had the most extreme traumatic experiences as children. Physical abuse, severe emotional abuse. They're kind of the product of generations of substance use.
Sexual abuse?
Horrible sexual abuse by many different people, uncles, cousins, but a lot of them, their moms have had serious substance use, so they have men in and out of their lives. These men are molesting these young women at young ages. Their moms even pimp them out, or their dads pimp them out. They have severe neglect, emotional abuse, stuff that I couldn't even go into. It's oftentimes when I hear their stories, I just think like, no, this can't be. And then I'm like, well, I'm a psychiatrist in a prison, and where else would you be hearing these things? And
these are only people that have gotten into some shit and that end up in prison somehow, right? Like, obviously the population of women and men in our country that have dealt with these severe traumas, who have then ended up with substance abuse problems. I mean, you're talking about a very small subset of people who have gotten in trouble for, drugs or drug-related crimes in these cases. I can't even imagine how many people are suffering these problems silently, right? Just completely out without a psychiatrist, or it almost sounds like the prison system, the corrections system, is doing them good by talking with a psychiatrist who can help them process and deal with some of this shit.
Well, I think that the way our country is and the way our healthcare system is, particularly when it comes to mental health, I think the prisons and the jails have become the mental health system for a vast majority of severely mentally ill people, including people with substance use, because we criminalized it. So people who are having problems with substance use end up in the correction system, and if they don't have a strong safety net of a family, so if they're coming from these highly dysfunctional families, they're going to end up in jail and prison because they don't have the resources to keep them out of jail and prison. And I mean, what I do as a psychiatrist is I don't do the counseling. I kind of do the assessments and the medication management. And of course, the patients I see, in addition to substance use disorder and PTSD, they also have some other type of mental illness. But there are therapists and addictions counselors and case managers who kind of do all of the other aspects of treatment, and these people actually get the care they need, but sadly it's in jail and prison. So here you have these people who've been dealt the most shittiest hands in life in terms of what they've had to endure, and then sort of to rub, insult and injury, now they're in prison because they've kind of coped with the only way they can by using drugs, and using drugs to such an extent that they're going to end up in the in the judicial system. So it's really an unfair, unjust system. And then of course people who have the family resources and the financial resources, they get better lawyers and they don't end up in prison, but they oftentimes don't really get the comprehensive treatment, which ironically people do get once they're in prison.
So that's actually very interesting, because a lot of people think of prison and they immediately think of like Oz, right? The TV show Oz or Prison Break, and these prison shows that show these major drug problems in prison, where it's almost easier to get drugs in prison than it is to get drugs on the street, and everyone is using heroin and everyone is being raped, or just this terrible, awful, horrible place. And what it sounds like is, at least where you're involved, is these people, even though they are unfortunate circumstances, that they are the product of abuse and trauma and substance abuse almost by circumstance, they're getting help. How do you think that that's common, or is it specific to where you are involved and you are working, or have you had something to do with the treatment that these inmates are getting?
Well, the two prisons that I work in are both state-run prisons, meaning they're not contracted out to these private contractors. That's so controversial right now.
The private prison
right,
system.
Yeah, these are not private prisons. These are state-owned and run prisons. And I work in a much less populated state, so it doesn't have some of the problems that some of our larger state prison systems like California and New York are facing. And then the prison that I work in the most is a women's prison, and I think women's prisons in general are very different than the men's prison, and that's not what we see on these TV shows. They're all men's prisons, and that is a very different environment. The women's prison in the state that I work is actually quite small, only 240 inmates, so it's a really different environment. A lot.
You say only 240 inmates.
Yeah.
I have no concept of what a normal prison population would look like. I live in Arizona. We have a pretty terrible prison system, but by prison standards, is 240 inmates really that small?
Yeah. The men's prison in the state that I work is 1,500, and we're talking a small, lowly populated state. So when you get to California, I mean, some of these prisons, I think, have like 4,000 inmates in terms of the men's prisons.
Wow.
The women's prisons are there are definitely a lot fewer female offenders, and I think the judicial system does try to do a better job of keeping them out of prison and going to more alternative placements, such as Department of Corrections substance use programs, and really tries to make every effort to keep them intact with their children. So I think in general the female prison population is lower, and it's just a different environment in general. But from what I've heard from women in the prison that I work who've been incarcerated in California and states like that, even in the women's prison in California and in some of these other more populated states, they're much higher offender population, and it's just a rougher environment than where I work. But I think part of that is a function of the population and a smaller prison, but part of it is a function of we've had an amazing warden at the women's prison who actually comes from a mental health background. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she sort of embraced the fact that our mental health system sucks, and prisons and jails have basically become the state psychiatric hospitals. And she used to run the state psychiatric hospital, and so she's like, well, we have the same population here, and we're going to treat them. Even though we're calling this prison, we are going to make it more like a psychiatric hospital.
Wow. So that seems really kind of progressive. Is that common? Or
no.
And it's not?
No.
Okay. And Robinson, to catch you up to speed here, we are with a very special guest. She spilled the beans. She is my lovely aunt, or aunt, depending on where you're from. Dr. Chris is joining us on the Sober Happy Hour radio broadcast. Robinson, you are at home now?
Yes, I'm at home.
So, gentlemen, feel free to pop in at any time if you have a question or a comment or you need clarification on something, because...
What state is she in?
I don't know if we were going to say what state she was in.
Oh, okay.
Just for...
I'm in Montana. I mean, I'm in Arizona now, but I live in Montana.
Got it. So you live and work in the state of Montana.
Yes.
Got it. So I find it really interesting that your take on the situation is that basically our prisons have become psychiatric hospitals.
Oh, absolutely, across the country, and that's kind of a well-known but sad fact.
That's kind of disgusting.
It is.
No, that's the conference that I came back from 2 weeks ago, was exactly on that whole thing, and I don't have it on me, but I referred to a graph, a chart that showed how the declining population in our state mental hospitals across the country was directly correlated with the rise of the prison population.
Huh.
And I'm pretty sure
absolutely.
I'm pretty sure you've seen that, Dr. Chris. It's pretty telling.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, they are now the de facto state psychiatric hospitals.
Robinson, you had something to say.
Reinstitutionalization.
Yeah. Are the prisoners that you're seeing or treating, are they basically all of them? Are they required to see you, or is it voluntary? Like only the ones that seek your assistance come to you?
Well, again, being a psychiatrist is very different than being a psychologist or a therapist. My role is doing diagnostic evaluations and then treating them with medications.
Drugs.
Well,
you have a prescription pad. That makes you awesome.
Well, no, that makes me a target. Well, that's a whole other subject. That makes me a target for severe, goal-directed behavior, I guess I'd call it. But
pill seekers.
Yeah.
This is the Sober Happy Hour.
Goal-directed behavior.
Well, I don't want to.
I know.
Stigmatize them, because a lot of these people, that's really the only way they've gotten through life.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
we take a sort of lighthearted approach to it, so we don't mean to make fun. We more or less are laughing with, as opposed to poking fun. But you're absolutely right.
I love the term.
Yeah.
What was it? It was goal-directed
behavior.
Goal-directed behavior.
Rather than saying manipulative.
Yeah, because that really labels them in a negative light, and that influences how other people treat them.
Of course.
And we just have to realize their goals aren't always the same as ours, and our job is to try to get our goals more in line. But what was I going to say? The ones that see me, if patients come in and they're already on psych medications, which I'd say probably 2/3 of them are, then they're automatically scheduled to see me. And then if they're in prison and they are wanting to be seen and think they need to be on medications, then they're seen. We're required to see them in terms of civil rights, that type of thing. And then there are ones where it gets really difficult. We have a lot of patients with severe mental illness, that severe schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where again they really shouldn't be in prison. Their crimes were related to being in a real altered mental state. They may not be on medications, and they may not want to be on medications. They may not think they have any kind of psychiatric problem, and it's a real challenge to get them to agree to be seen. Oftentimes, especially in the women's prison, because we have a really awesome team there, they do finally get them to come around to agree to be seen. But those would be the 3 different routes in terms of how I would end up seeing them.
Are they often or ever resistant to your treatment, to seeing you?
Absolutely. Well, except for the severely psychotic patients who don't have any insight into their illness, many of them want to see me. They just don't necessarily want what I want to prescribe them. They want something a lot more abusable.
Goal-directed behavior.
Yeah.
Understood. So, when you got into the field of psychiatry, was dealing with inmates in prison and the correctional institution, as it were, was that a goal, or did you fall into it? Was it a natural progression of your career? How did you get into this? Because it seems very specialized, because you're dealing with not just people who may be living a normal life and find themselves dealing with some sort of mental disorder in need of medication or treatment for something, but people who, like you said, may not even fully know that they have mental issues and have wound up in prison, or maybe wound up in prison prior to being told that they may have a mental issue. Was this an area of practice that you were seeking out, or did you kind of fall into it?
No, I totally fell into it. And it can be very rewarding, and in some ways I wish I had sort of known that path earlier and had kind of specialized in that. But I, even when I was in training in residency, really loved working with the severely mentally ill population, and enjoyed working at the county hospital in Seattle, and worked at the county hospital even when I finished residency, because I really liked working with, again, the severely mentally ill population, and the population who had no resources. They couldn't afford to go to some private boutique psychiatrist for their, depression or something. That was the population I liked working with. And then when I moved to Montana, and I worked in sort of a regional psych hospital, I realized that I wasn't seeing any of those kinds of patients that I used to see in the county hospital in Seattle. And I even used to joke with some of my friends who were still in Seattle, saying, where are the Harborview type patients? And I knew they had to exist in Montana. I just didn't know where they were. Well, lo and behold, they're in the jails and the prisons. So as our healthcare system kind of deteriorated, and particularly our mental health system, and there was this shift over the last couple decades to more and more of these kinds of patients are in the prisons rather than the county and state hospitals. I just kind of followed where these patients ended up, and I'm like, well, many states, Montana included, don't have county hospitals. I think some of the states, like Washington, that still have better or put their resources in public medicine, are still probably treating many of these patients in the county hospital or the state hospital. But a lot of states who've just pulled the funding out of any type of public mental health, that's where the patients are. So it was kind of I fell into it only because I just kind of followed where the sickest patients are.
Where do the patients go that should be in those state-run psychiatric facilities who are not criminals? Where do they go?
They all end up being criminals because we criminalize substance use, and patients with severe mental illness usually have co-occurring substance use and really limited resources, so they're the ones getting nabbed by the police because they're drunk and schizophrenic and trying to stay warm, so they light a dumpster on fire and they end up in jail. So,
or they break into somebody's house
or you know,
garage.
or exactly. They're just where cops are going to be finding them.
Yeah, criminals by circumstance.
Exactly.
Not by choice.
Right.
And we throw them in prison, and then it sounds like, thank God, that they have a warden and a psychiatrist like you who is willing to treat them like a human being who needs help, as opposed to a prisoner/animal like we treat them here in Arizona and put them in pink underwear and put them on a chain gang and treat them like they're less than human. It sounds like you take a very human and humane approach to treating these patients, and I'm even now calling them patients as opposed to inmates, because inmate doesn't seem fair.
No, it's not. Well, at the women's prison, it is a very fortunate situation because the warden there is, it comes from a mental health background. In the same state, at the state men's prison, prior to me working there, it was kind of a more inhumane environment. But fortunately, across the country, the ACLU has gotten involved and has, through civil liberties lawsuits, initiated a lot of prison reform. And so, based on civil rights laws, inmates are they're not only, we're required by law to meet their psychiatric needs, and if it's not happening, prisons across the country have faced huge lawsuits, and that has helped reform the system. And it sounds like maybe Arizona needs the ACLU to get involved.
Sounds like it.
We do. Our entire behavioral health system is founded on a lawsuit at least in Maricopa County, and that lawsuit actually applies to the rest of the state because the state legislature determines budgets for behavioral health based on that lawsuit. So, that's been in place since 1980.
Mm-hmm.
Are you downloading Napster files right now, Chaz? Is that what's going on here?
No, why?
I don't know. Just you're very choppy. And you said that the music was choppy for you earlier as well.
A little bit, but everything sounds clear on your end now.
Okay. Interesting.
Hold
on. Let me make sure that I understand. Since the 1980s,
yeah,
funding for the prison system were you talking about prison system or
I was talking behavioral health.
Behavioral health. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I guess from a prisoner perspective, have you seen an uptick in people getting out of prison and then leading a normal life and sticking with a psychiatrist or a program or whatever you call it when they are being treated, and then they get out of prison? And you say that they don't have the means to seek help, and that's how they end up in prison in the first place. So what happens when they get out? If they got put in prison,
that's a problem.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. There's a big disconnect between there is no connection between the prison system and the community, and that's where it all falls apart because, particularly in a state like Montana, there are such poor mental health resources in the community that once these patients get out of prison, even when they're still in pre-release, there's nowhere for them to get mental health treatment, and so that's just a big flaw, because then their rates of recidivism are very high because there's really limited resources in terms of where they can get treatment.
That is not dissimilar from drug treatment programs, right?
Yeah.
Somebody goes into a drug treatment program, and if they don't have the support that they need when they get done with the inpatient therapy or whatever they're doing, they're right back to what they know because they're left to their own devices.
Mhm.
Goodness.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the work that you're doing is rewarding.
Mhm.
I can see how it would be rewarding, but I also assume that you probably deal with a lot of bullshit. And I know that people listening might be very interested to know what kind of bullshit you get to deal with. And this is the part of the Sober Happy Hour that makes the Sober Happy Hour what it is. We don't pull punches. We don't sugarcoat, because we know that the people who are listening are either addicts themselves or dealing with addicts and their behaviors. What are, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the more interesting, we'll call them interesting, encounters that you might face on a regular basis? Because you're dealing with people who obviously, if we're going to look towards the drug abuse side of things, these are people who are probably on that really upper echelons of addictive behavior.
Extreme,
right?
Extreme.
They're getting thrown in prison at this point. Not just jail, not just the drunk tank, but sentenced to time in a prison. So there must be some pretty crazy shit that goes on sometimes.
Yeah, well, some of the craziest that I have to deal with, which is extremely frustrating, yet at the same time when you finally work through it, is the part that's rewarding, is these patients are so severely addicted and their behaviors are so ingrained in addiction that when they're in an environment like prison where they can't go get meth, which is a big problem in Montana, or whatever their drug of choice is, opioids, and they're struggling with all the shit and turmoil underneath that, and the whole desire to not feel anything. They don't want to feel any emotion that is that causes them discomfort at all. They have very little distress tolerance, and through their lives it's just been drug that. So when they can't get their hands on illicit drugs or abusable drug, well, I strike that because everything is abusable. They find extremely creative ways of getting high on anything, and so there's a whole prison culture in terms of how to misuse prescribed medications that people would never think of as abusable drugs,
With the exception of catching, drying out, crushing, and smoking bed bugs. We know that that's not true. We know that is bullshit. Thank you, Snopes.com.
Well, yeah. So are you saying that is false, the bed bug thing?
Yes, very false.
Okay. I'm sure they've tried it, because they will try anything.
Because they saw it on the fucking internet. That's why they tried it.
Well, I'm sure that before they saw it, they thought, well, maybe we can crush and snort bed bugs.
Yeah.
Because
or black widow spiders. Fuck it.
I mean,
you can smoke scorpions. That's a real thing.
Well, shoot. I mean, we can't have hand sanitizer because they'll get drunk off that.
Yep.
Mouthwash. They're not allowed to have a lot of types of food in their cell because they make fermented products out of that. But in terms of the meds that I prescribe, here I'm trying to help these people, but so many things that I would normally use that aren't going to be abused in the community, they find ways to abuse. I mean, even Zoloft or Buspar or, most of the antidepressants, if they crush and snort enough of them, they'll get high. Or, Wellbutrin is pretty much banned in all secured facilities, jails and prisons, because if you crush and snort that, it's like doing cocaine or meth.
Wow.
You know, it limits so much of what I can prescribe, because a lot of them are just out to abuse it, and if they're not out to abuse it, they're going to get bulldogged by other inmates to, you know, hand it over. They're going to get victimized for a medication that they may really need.
Yeah.
So I forget what the question was.
Why would an inmate know that another inmate was being prescribed a medication? I assume they're not just being handed a bottle of their pills. Is it more controlled than that?
It is a little more controlled, but unfortunately not a lot, because again, the thought is this isn't a psych hospital. These are patients who are, I don't know, community dwellers or something, even though they're not. So they have this weird way of dispensing meds. They have these like med boxes that they go to line, and the officers just kind of let them take it out of their med boxes. But everyone knows everyone else's business there. I mean, in a women's prison, it's like there are no secrets amongst the inmates.
Gossip.
Yeah, and the other inmates, especially the highly goal-driven ones, they'll see what another inmate is taking, and they'll be like, "Oh, that looks like Seroquel. Hey, hand over the Series," because that's like prison heroin.
They are some of the most well-educated people when it comes to pharmaceuticals.
Oh, yeah.
It is incredible what a drug addict knows about pharmaceuticals.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Seroquel, that shit knocks you on your ass like within 10 or 15 minutes of taking it. I take that every night. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's not really supposed to be prescribed for sleep. It's really only
it's an antipsychotic.
Yeah, for schizophrenia or bipolar, but, you know, it is. And again, if you're, you know, manic, running down naked in the street thinking you're Jesus Christ, it's a good medication for you. But, you know, if you're crushing it and snorting it, you're getting pretty stoned.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So 240 inmates, a small population. How many inmates or patients in a day are you tending to on a normal day, on a Tuesday?
Well, probably about 17, so 2 new intakes and then 15 follow-ups, and that's in about a 9-hour day.
So that sounds like a substantial number of patients to see in a day. I think about the industry that I work in, and I don't deal with psych patients, although sometimes they certainly seem like psych patients. There's 240 of them.
Yeah.
That means in a month, you know, they might get to see you how many times?
Well, that really depends. I mean, if they're really unstable, I might see them every week until they're stable. If they're totally stable and we haven't made any medication changes, I might see them every 3 to 4 months. But they're going to therapy groups, they're going to substance use groups, they're going to trauma groups. I'm just doing their management. I'm not doing the counseling, the therapy, that type of thing.
So how many other professionals? I don't even know what I'm ignorant. I'm sorry. I have never lied to you people and made myself seem wise in any way. How many other psychologists or counselors or professionals in your field are working with the population at the prison aside from you? Because I'm ignorant enough to think that you're like the only one, but I'm assuming that's not the case.
Well, I am the only. What's really shocking is for the last 4 years, I've been the only psychiatrist for the entire state.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I know. It's you know, and this isn't uncommon in other places. I mean, it's kind of a crisis.
I'm sure you're amazing at what you do, but that is not a job for one person.
No, it's not. You know, and they've had 2 vacant positions for, you know, ever.
Why?
Well, Montana is a hard state to get a lot of specialists to come to, for one thing. So the whole state has the whole country has a shortage of psychiatrists honestly. And then when you get into some of the more rural states, it's even worse. So the whole state is very underserved in terms of psychiatry, and corrections is just not a place that most psychiatrists want to work. So that's a big part of the problem. But what was I going to say? So as far as like at the women's prison for the 240 inmates, there are 2 full-time therapists, a contract therapist. There's one licensed addiction counselor, and then I don't know, 3 or 4 case managers. So not a lot, but they do some incredibly good groups. There's not a lot of resources for individual counseling. They'll do some on a limited basis, but they do have some very good groups that the inmates are oftentimes required to go to before they can go to the parole board. So if they're like, screw it, I'm not going to go, after they get flopped a few times, their motivation level gets a little bit increased.
What does that mean? They get flopped?
They go in front of the parole board, and then their parole gets denied because they haven't gone to any of these groups.
So getting flopped, not a good thing if
Not
you're
a
a
good
prisoner trying to get out of prison.
Exactly.
Don't get flopped.
Yeah. And at the men's prison, I think they have 6 therapists. Obviously, they have more, but proportionally not, because there's 1,500 inmates.
But
there.
Are you responsible for the men's prison as well?
Well, sort of. I do. It's on the other side of the state, so I do telemedicine there, but they have 2 other psychiatrists that are out of state that do telemedicine too. So not an ideal situation, but it does get their medication needs met.
Can you explain what telemedicine is?
It's video conferencing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they are prescribing medication and I assume assessing patients via video conferencing?
It works pretty well. It's a secured connection through the state, so it's kind of like Skype, but it's secured. And so when I see patients, they're at the men's prison, and I'm at the women's prison, which is across the state. And I see them on a television screen. They see me on a television screen. There's a nurse and a mental health tech in the room. So if I need to do something a little more hands-on, like check for certain muscle side effects of medications, I can watch the nurse go through it. But I can, it's just like Skyping with someone. And a lot of these inmates, most of the inmates are younger. They're used to Skyping, FaceTime, that type of thing. So it's not an unfamiliar technology.
So pretty soon it will go from telemedicine to Snapchat medicine, because that's what all the youngins are doing.
Yeah.
So are there other psychiatrists that are using the telemedicine to treat patients with you, or are you the only one seeing all of those patients?
No, like I said, there are a couple who are in Chicago, I think, who are doing it at the men's prison, because that's really the only way people can get seen.
Wow.
But not the women's prison.
The women's prison, at least up until now, it's been me, and I've been doing it in person, which I much prefer, but given the fact there's no one to do it in person, and again...
Better than nothing.
Well, yeah, and in a lot of rural states that are very underserved, telemedicine and telepsychiatry are really becoming, kind of a big thing.
And just another way that technology has changed the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And if this is a good thing, to me, and to people listening, it may sound a little absurd. Maybe we're not far off from the future of me seeing my doctor is via FaceTime. And, because I'll tell you right now, my doctor, if I have, my checkup with my doctor, he's not really touching me unless I'm going in for a physical or something. He's more or less looking at me, making sure I don't look like I've lost my mind and that I'm not back on drugs or something. And he can tell that by looking at me and talking to me face to face. And, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's a futuristic outlook on medicine in this country. But I think also when you have a doctor and you've had a doctor for many, many years and you move away now all of a sudden you're dealing with a whole new doctor and a different way of practicing medicine, and maybe you're not as comfortable with that doctor. I could almost see that as a very positive direction that medicine could go, as long as it's not used as yet another way, like our public defender's system, where you get 3 minutes per case and everybody just turnstiles through and nobody gives a shit anymore. I actually think that's pretty admirable. It's admirable that these people are taking time to help an underserved community via a technology that is now available and somewhat ubiquitous, and that they've even taken the time to make sure that this is like a secure connection so that these patients' privacy is still front of mind. I think is pretty cool. How long have they been doing the telemedicine thing?
In general, or at the prison?
Whatever you're familiar with.
Well, telemedicine has been around for, I don't know, at least 10 years or more, especially in states like Montana, where you've got people living, hundreds of miles away from where they could see any kind of specialist. In the Montana State Prison, I actually started doing that, I don't know, a couple of years ago, because I came out here and you kind of helped me get some of the equipment.
Yeah.
And it was just out of sheer necessity, because they actually kind of had to get rid of the psychiatrist who was there, because he really had gotten really burnt out and was not really was not really treating the patients the way they needed to be treated. And so I was like, hey, I can't, drive across the state to see people, but let's see if we can do it by telemedicine. And it's really worked out well. And, I spend as much time with each patient as I need to get the information and the evaluation I need and to treat them. Obviously there are some, just like there are going to be some doctors in person who are just like 15 minutes, but, that's true if you're in person or if you're doing it by telemedicine.
You hear that? Do you hear that, listeners? I single-handedly improved the psychiatric care of the prisoners in the state of Montana. You're welcome. So, the whole concept of drug treatment in prison sounds, again, because of media and entertainment, sounds almost like an oxymoron, right? That you go into prison with a bachelor's in marijuana and you come out with a doctorate in cocaine, right? That this is the way that our prison system functions. But it sounds like, at least in your experience and with your help, and I give you a tremendous amount of praise and credit for the work that you're doing, it sounds like that doesn't have to be the case. What can we do to fix this in our now overwhelmingly prison-centric society, where we jail the drug abusers, and then in most prison populations they're not necessarily getting the treatment that they need, and the drug habit just persists or gets worse or whatever. And in your case, what is the success rate of trying to treat someone who is in prison because of circumstance that their true problem is their addiction? What does success look like, and how often do you think that you achieve success?
That's a hard question.
I ask the hard questions.
Yeah. God, it's so complex because there's so many different factors. I see a lot, and again, most of my experiences with the women's prison, and I do see a lot of success there in terms of people who have severe mental illness who've never been properly treated, getting properly treated and getting stable and functioning, possibly for the first times in their whole lives.
You ever get any warm greetings from these people once they leave? Do they ever thank you when they're on their way out, or do they even have an opportunity to do that?
Yes, actually, I have had a few, even while they're in there, just saying, I've never really felt like this. And these sometimes are people who fought me tooth and nail, who have bipolar disorder and severe substance use, and they're like, I want Wellbutrin, and you're like, no, you need lithium. And finally they're on lithium or another mood stabilizer, and they're doing well. And at first they're like, I don't feel right because I'm not going into a rage every 10 seconds, and this doesn't feel normal.
I feel like a zombie.
Yeah. And it's just like, honey, the rest of the world feels this way. We're all a little boring, we don't have turmoil and drama in our lives, and it's kind of nice. But, there's been one case that really highlights what can be accomplished. Is there was one young woman who had very severe schizoaffective disorder, which is kind of like sort of a cross between schizophrenia and bipolar. And
what does the symptom look like? What is you normally dealing with?
She was always kind of psychotic, so she was always very delusional in terms of auras and spirit things, and
seeing shit that wasn't there.
No, she wasn't seeing shit that wasn't there, but just these really expansive out there thoughts, like way beyond like the people in Sedona. And I don't know, just like energy and things like that. But like half the time she didn't even make sense when she wasn't medicated.
She was delusional.
She was very delusional. And in fact, her crime had to do with she robbed a bank because she felt like she needed to do that to get the money so that she could save the world or something totally bizarre like that.
Wow.
Yeah. And so she was very kind of, she looked like a little fairy and was very vulnerable in that way. And
wait, she looked like a little
she was
fairy?
very wispy and you know what I mean? Just so I'm trying to remember the whole deal, but she'd been in prison several times before I even started working there. Never did well in prison, never stayed out. Well, I don't think she even ever got out, but they did send her to the state hospital at one point. And because that's a co-ed population, she got pregnant at the state hospital. Came back to prison. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was finally able to get her on medications because she always refused to take medications. Kind of under-medicated her a little bit because she wasn't ever going to be happy if she wasn't a little bit out there in the spirit world. And then we put her on a long-acting antipsychotic, which she stayed on, and she was discharged from prison to a mental health group home, and she has stayed out of prison for 3 years. So, wow. Yeah, because she stayed on her medication. So to me, that just having one case like that where she was just severely ill is rewarding. But there have been other ones like that. With it gets more complicated when there's a much huger substance use component, because in Montana, like anywhere across the state, there's really limited resources for people with substance use disorders. So you can make all this great progress when they're in a really controlled environment like prison, and even pre-release, and then they get out and without having a really huge safety net, their chances of success are very low.
What is you've mentioned this term pre-release a few times.
We used to be called a halfway house. So when they get out of prison and they're on probation, they're not immediately put into the community. It's less restrictive than prison, but more restrictive than living in the community. They're living in like in Montana, they've turned some old like Howard Johnson hotels into these pre-release centers.
And is that to protect the prisoners, or to protect the community from the prisoners?
No, it's a stepping stone for the inmates. Yeah. I mean, because the vast majority of these people are not violent offenders. You know,
Right.
they're
To
drug
help them-
addicts.
To help them assimilate back into society.
Yeah. And get a job and have to start doing more things on their own. Exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
But, you know, to answer your original question, the only way I see this problem improving is if we just have universal health care. You know, that's at the root of this problem.
How does that help solve this problem?
Well, because all these people with mental illness would have access to medical care, you know, and mental health care is medical care. And substance use is now, you know, with the parity laws is covered under health insurance, but people don't have health insurance. So if everyone had health insurance, people could get the treatment they needed.
And do you believe that if people had the coverage that they would seek the help? Because it sounds like a lot of the people that you're helping may not even fully comprehend the fact that they have a problem.
Well, you know,
or do you think that it would sort of work itself out naturally, that they would then go see a doctor who may then be able to tell them, hey, I know you're here because you have a physical ailment, but let me refer you to this psychiatrist because you also seem a little off your rocker?
Well, there would be that, but a lot of these people who eventually end up in jail and prison, they've been brought to the local emergency room probably 30 times, but they're either not admitted because there's not any kind of psychiatric hospital, or there's kind of these bullshit private they're private in quotes, not for profit hospitals, but the money is all going back into the hospital CEO's pockets. So these people get admitted for 3 days, they get discharged after 3 days, they're right back out on the streets, and after the 10th time in 1 year of the police bringing them into the ER, they're just like, oh man, screw it, we're going to throw you in jail.
Yeah. And with a universal healthcare system, because they don't seem to have this problem in countries with
Exactly
a single payer or universal healthcare or government run healthcare system. But because I would assume that a lot of these people don't have a lot of money,
they have no money,
they're not able to seek any sort of treatment for these problems anywhere. But where, because the right side of the political spectrum will tell you that, you know, for somebody who is completely broke, they do get access to medical care, right? Through Medicaid, or what we have here in Arizona known as Access, that if you're poor, you have, you know, a basic health insurance policy that's covered by the state.
That's not true.
It's not true.
It's more true now with Medicaid expansion, but prior to that, you know, kids would be eligible for Medicaid, but just because you were poor or had no money didn't mean you would get Medicaid. You also had to fall into one of these more disabled groups. Just being poor alone didn't qualify you for Medicaid. You know, that if you were broke, unemployed, person without any type of disability, you would not get Medicaid.
But with expansion and wonderful states like the state of Arizona that have decided not to expand Medicaid, that could get better with Medicaid expansion, or it just opens it up to more people?
Oh, it's so complicated. I mean, it opens up health care for more people, but I still think it just perpetuates this very fragmented system where there's big parts of the system that simply don't exist or don't work. And mental health and substance use is one of them, because they are money losers for these big hospital chains. So there's really nobody providing these services because they don't make money. So we need to just have a system that is not for profit, that is not driven by profits, even if they call it not for profit.
Right.
It is. People are profiting from it.
Of course. We've talked about that on this show many times, about these not-for-profit organizations where they may, on their books at the end of the year, be able to show the government that they've made no money as a company, but that doesn't mean that they haven't paid their CEOs and their executives millions of dollars just for being a part of it, right?
Right. And then they just keep using the money to reinvest, to expand their big, gigantic monopolies that provide shitty health care.
Yeah. Well, I for one think that what you are doing and what you have been a part of, and it even sounds like you have helped expand the programs that you're working with these inmates and these patients and getting them the treatment that they need, even resorting to using technology to help even more of these inmates in these prisons. I think that's commendable. I think it's a wonderful thing. And I hope that other prisons and other wardens who are in charge of these prisons will take note of what is happening, especially in the women's prison that you're working in, because if the case is that so many of these prisoners are dealing with far more than just a substance abuse problem, far more than just the criminal acts that they have been a part of because of circumstance, and we need to just stop throwing the book at these people and throwing them in prison. But if more prisons were like the prison that you're working in, then at least that's a silver lining. Because if they were just being thrown into a prison where they were being neglected and ignored, we weren't dealing with or helping them with their PTSD, and which then led to the substance abuse, then the cycle just continues. It goes around and around. They come up for parole, they get out, they come back. It's recidivism. That's the word, right?
Right.
I mean, our recidivism rate in this country is like 80-some%. It is absolutely ridiculous. And I think if we were to treat the root of the problem more openly and readily, then maybe we could bring that number down. And decriminalizing drugs, I think, is something that we've seen work in other countries like Portugal, and they're treating drug addicts instead of imprisoning them. And it almost sounds like in your situation, you're doing both. And, yes, they're still ending up in prison, but at least they're getting some treatment and some help. And I think that is a very good thing. We lost Chaz.
Oh.
He just disappeared. But that happens sometimes. Maybe his battery died. Robinson, do you have anything that you would like to ask or add as we wind down this wonderful episode of the Sober Happy Hour radio broadcast?
I have just been having a very good time listening. It's very interesting and informative, and I'm happy to hear all this stuff. I don't have any questions right now.
Well, then I will do us all the favor of starting the bumper music.
Okay.
And I want to a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Chris, our guest this evening on the Sober Happy Hour radio broadcast. It has been a long time coming. I've been looking forward to having you on the show for a very long time. So thank you for coming all the way out to the studio from inside the house to join us this evening.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. No, our pleasure. And this episode of the Sober Happy Hour radio broadcast will be edited and released via podcast this week. I'll do it this week. Maybe I won't wait till Saturday. Next week, I think we wanted to talk about big tobacco. That was originally what we were going to talk about tonight, but then we were joined by our lovely guest and we kind of changed gears a little bit at the last minute. So for Chaz and Robinson, I am your host. That is all. That is the Sober Happy Hour radio broadcast. Visit us on Facebook.com/Sober Happy Hour. Follow us on Twitter @Sober Happy Hour. Send us an email, soberhappyhour@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube. It's right down there. And if you're going to subscribe to the podcast, please make sure that you rate and review. That helps us stay towards the top of that list. It's very, very helpful. And if you or yours is considering getting sober, I highly recommend it. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
Good night, Robinson.
Good night. Thank you, Chris.